The hollow ache in Tobias Irving's stomach had become a constant companion, gnawing at him with teeth sharper than any wolf's. And when he stumbled to his cabin door that frost-bitten morning expecting nothing but the same empty forest that had mocked his hunting efforts for days, the sight of a freshly killed deer lying across his threshold stopped him mid-step. Steam still rose from the carcass in the winter air, and the blood pooling beneath it was warm enough to melt the thin layer of snow on his doorstep. Tobias blinked, certain his hunger-addled mind was playing tricks on him, but the deer remained solid and real. His hands shook as he knelt beside it, pressing his palm against the animal's still warm flank. The kill was clean, a single arrow wound through the heart. Professional, efficient, nothing like his own clumsy attempts over the past week. He lifted his head, scanning the tree line that pressed close to his small homestead. The pines stood silent and watching, their branches heavy with snow. Nothing moved in the gray dawn light. No tracks led away from his door that he could see, though the frozen ground wouldn't hold prints well. Someone had been here. Someone skilled enough to approach without waking him, to leave this gift and vanish like smoke. Tobias's throat tightened with an emotion he couldn't quite name, gratitude mixed with shame, mixed with desperate relief. He'd come to this frontier land 6 months ago with dreams of making a new life, of leaving behind the war that had stolen 3 years of his youth and most of his peace of mind. The veteran's land grant had seemed like salvation, a chance to build something with his own hands far from the screams and the blood. But the reality of frontier survival had proven harsher than he'd imagined. The first few months had gone well enough. He'd built the cabin, cleared a small field for spring planting, and managed to trap and hunt enough to keep himself fed. Then the fever had come, laying him low for 2 weeks. By the time he'd recovered, winter had set its teeth into the land and the game had grown scarce and wary. His weakened state made stalking through deep snow exhausting. His shots went wide. His traps came up empty. 3 days ago, he'd eaten the last of his supplies, a thin gruel of grain that had left him hungrier than before. He'd spent yesterday lying in his bed, too weak to do more than keep the fire burning, wondering if this was how it would end. Not in glory on some battlefield, but alone and starving in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. Now, staring at the deer, Tobias felt tears prick his eyes. He blinked them away furiously. He was alive. Someone had saved his life. The why of it could wait. His body was screaming for sustenance, and he had work to do. It took him longer than it should have to dress the deer. His hands shook with weakness, and the knife slipped more than once. But muscle memory from his years in the army came back, and eventually he had the hide removed and the meat quartered. He hung most of it from the rafters of his small smokehouse, then carried a haunch inside to his cabin's hearth. The smell of roasting venison filled the small space, and Tobias's stomach clenched so hard it hurt. He forced himself to wait until the meat was properly cooked, then cut a modest portion. Every instinct screamed at him to gorge himself, but he'd seen men die from eating too much after extended hunger. He chewed slowly, savoring each bite, feeling strength seep back into his limbs with every swallow. When he'd finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the fire. Who? The question circled his mind like a hawk. His nearest neighbor was old Miriam Clark, a widow who lived 3 miles east. She was kind but had barely enough for herself. The trading post was a day's walk south, and he'd made few friends there, just conducting business and moving on. He kept to himself mostly, another former soldier who didn't quite fit into peacetime society. The skill of the kill nagged at him. That arrow placement spoke of expertise, of someone who hunted not for sport but for survival, someone who knew the forest intimately. Tobias stood and moved to his small window, peering out at the tree line again. The sun had risen higher now, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. Something caught his eye, a flash of movement near the edge of the clearing. He squinted, his hand instinctively moving to the hunting knife at his belt. There, between two large pines, a figure stood watching his cabin. Even at this distance, Tobias could tell the watcher was tall, very tall, broader than any person he'd seen in these parts. They wore furs and leather, blending with the forest shadows, but as he focused, details emerged. Green skin. Not the pallor of illness, but a deep, healthy green like summer leaves. An orc. Tobias's breath caught. He'd fought orcs during the war, brutal battles on the Eastern Front, where human kingdoms clashed with orc clans over disputed territory. He'd learned to fear their strength, their ferocity in combat. He'd also learned, in quieter moments, that they were more than the monsters his commanders had claimed. They had honor. They fought for their families, their land, just as he had. But what was an orc doing here in human territory, and why had one left him food? The figure turned, seeming to sense his observation, and for just a moment their eyes met across the distance. Even from here, Tobias could see the deliberateness in that gaze. Then the orc melted back into the forest, disappearing so completely it was as if he was certain now it had been a she. Something about the build and movement had never been there at all. Tobias spent the rest of that day regaining his strength. He ate small portions at regular intervals. He tended his fire. He tried not to think about the orc woman who had saved his life, but failed miserably. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that tall figure standing vigil at the edge of his clearing. The next morning, he woke to find another gift at his door. This time it was a brace of rabbits, already skinned and cleaned, hanging from a peg he hadn't noticed before driven into his doorframe. Tobias took them down with trembling hands, looking immediately toward the tree line. Nothing. No one. But he felt watched, and the sensation wasn't entirely uncomfortable. "Thank you," he called out to the silent forest. His voice sounded strange after days of not speaking. "I don't know who you are, but thank you." Only the wind answered, sighing through the pines. This pattern continued for a week. Every morning brought some new offering: fish from the frozen stream, wild onions dug from beneath the snow, even a bundle of dried herbs that Tobias recognized as having medicinal properties. Each gift was left without ceremony or explanation. Each time, Tobias would look toward the forest and sometimes catch a glimpse of his mysterious benefactor, always watching from a distance, never approaching. He began leaving his own offerings in return. It seemed wrong to simply take without giving anything back. He had little to offer, but he placed what he could on a flat stone near the tree line: a small loaf of bread made from his dwindling flour stores, a carved wooden cup he'd made during the long winter evenings, a piece of dried venison from that first deer. The gifts disappeared each night. Tobias found himself thinking about the orc woman constantly. What was her story? Why was she alone out here? Orcs typically traveled in clans, family groups bound by fierce loyalty. A solitary orc was unusual, possibly an outcast, though he couldn't imagine what offense would warrant such a fate. He wanted to see her properly, to speak with her, to understand this strange, silent exchange that had developed between them. But he didn't know how to bridge that gap. Every time he tried to approach the forest edge where she watched, she would vanish before he got close. 2 weeks after the first deer appeared, a winter storm rolled in with the fury of a wounded bear. Snow fell so thick Tobias couldn't see 5 feet beyond his windows. The wind howled like the damned, and he spent the day and night huddled by his fire, grateful for the meat hanging in his smokehouse. This was the kind of storm that killed people who weren't prepared. When it finally passed the following evening, Tobias dug himself out and checked his property. The smokehouse had held, though snow had drifted nearly to its roof. His woodpile was half buried but intact. Everything was as it should be, except for the collapsed shelter at the edge of his clearing. Tobias hadn't noticed it before it was tucked into a small hollow where the forest met his land, camouflaged with branches and moss. But the weight of the snow had caused one side to cave in, exposing the interior. A small fire pit, long cold, a bedroll of furs. A few belongings wrapped in oiled leather. Someone had been living there. Watching over him from barely 50 yards away, his heart pounding, Tobias approached cautiously. The shelter was empty now, but signs of habitation were everywhere. This had been more than a temporary camp. This had been a home, however humble, and now it was destroyed. "Where are you?" he called into the gathering dusk. "Are you all right?" The forest remained silent. Tobias made a decision then. He returned to his cabin and gathered supplies: an extra blanket, some rope, dried food. He left them on the flat stone where they'd been trading gifts, then added something more. Using a piece of charcoal from his fire, he wrote a message on a flat piece of bark. "My home is yours if you need it. You saved my life. Let me offer shelter in return." He placed the bark prominently on top of the supplies and went back inside, though he left his door unbarred for the first time in months. Sleep came fitfully that night. Every sound made him start was that footsteps, the door creaking. But morning came without incident. When he checked, the supplies were gone, but the bark message remained, and beneath his words, a reply had been added in careful, scratched letters. "I cannot. Forgive me." Tobias traced the words with his finger. The handwriting was unpracticed but clear. So she could write, at least a little. And she was refusing his help, even though she clearly needed it. Stubborn, he thought, but without heat. He understood stubbornness. It had kept him alive through the war and the fever and the hunger. He wrote another message. "Then let me help you rebuild. No one should be alone in this cold." Again he left it on the stone. Again it disappeared overnight. Again a reply came. "You do not understand what you ask." This began a strange correspondence. Tobias would leave messages, questions, thoughts. She would respond, always brief, always maintaining her distance. He learned her name was Kresh, which she explained meant winter wolf in her clan's tongue. He told her about his time in the war, carefully not mentioning which battles or where, not wanting to risk discovering they'd fought on opposite sides. She told him she'd been cast out from her clan for refusing an arranged marriage to a warrior she despised. "They called me faithless," one message read. "Said I brought shame to my family, but I could not bond myself to a male who treated his mates like property, so I left." Tobias wrote back. That took courage, more than most would have. Her reply was a single word, or foolishness. The messages became longer, more personal. Tobias found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone: his nightmares about the war, his fears that he'd never fit into a peaceful world, his desperate hope that this frontier life might offer him redemption. Kresh wrote about her love of the forest, the freedom she'd found in solitude, the pain of being separated from her younger siblings whom she missed terribly. "You ever regret it?" Tobias wrote one evening. "Leaving your clan," the answer came the next morning. "Every day, and not at all." Both truths exist together. He understood that more than she could know. 3 weeks into their correspondence, disaster struck. Tobias was checking his traps in the forest, following a game trail he'd scouted earlier, when the snow beneath his feet gave way. He fell hard, tumbling down a ravine he hadn't seen, hidden as it was beneath the winter white. He hit the bottom with a sickening crack, and pain exploded through his left leg. He lay there gasping, staring up at the gray sky visible between the trees. The ravine wasn't deep, maybe 10 feet, but its walls were steep and icy. With a broken leg, he had no chance of climbing out, and no one knew where he was. No one would come looking, no one except maybe. "Kresh," he called, his voice raw with pain. "Kresh, I need help," only silence answered. Of course. She was probably miles away, checking her own traps or hunting. No reason she would be close enough to hear. Tobias tried to calm his breathing, to think through his options. He could try to splint the leg himself, but he had no materials. He could attempt to drag himself out, but the pain was already making him lightheaded. A face appeared above him, silhouetted against the sky. Green skin, small tusks protruding from a strong jaw, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Eyes the color of amber fixed on him with fierce intensity. "Do not move," Kresh said, her voice deeper than he'd expected, rich and resonant. "I am coming down." She descended the ravine wall with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the wilderness, finding handholds and footholds Tobias couldn't even see. Within moments, she was kneeling beside him, her large hands moving over his leg with surprising gentleness. "Broken," she confirmed, her accent giving the word a slightly different cadence. "But clean. I can set it, but it will hurt." "I'm familiar with pain," Tobias managed, trying to smile and probably failing. Up close, Kresh was even more striking than he'd imagined during all those weeks of glimpses and shadows. She stood easily over 6 feet tall, with the broad shoulders and muscled build of a warrior. But her face held a softness he hadn't expected, full lips, a slight upturn at the corners of her eyes that suggested she'd once smiled often. She wore practical hunting leathers and furs, all in shades that would blend with the forest. A bow and quiver hung across her back. "This will hurt," she repeated, and before he could brace himself, she grasped his leg and pulled. The bone shifted back into place with a grinding sensation that made Tobias's vision go white. He heard someone screaming and realized dimly it was him. When awareness returned, he was lying with his head in Kresh's lap. She'd removed her fur cloak and wadded it under his head as a pillow. Her hand rested on his chest, whether to comfort him or hold him down, he wasn't sure. "Forgive me," she said quietly. "It had to be done quickly." "I know," Tobias whispered. "Thank you. Again, I seem to be making a habit of needing you to save my life." Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or pleasure. "You are not an easy human to keep alive, Tobias Irving." Hearing his full name in her voice did something strange to his chest. "You read my messages carefully." "I read them many times." She looked away, and he could have sworn he saw color darken her green cheeks. "They were. I valued them. So did I. Yours, I mean." He shifted slightly, hissing as pain lanced through his leg. Kresh had already splinted it with branches and was binding it with strips of leather, her movements efficient and practiced. "You have done this before," he observed. "Many times. Orc hunters learn field medicine young. We do not have the luxury of healers on every hunt." She finished securing the splint and sat back on her heels, studying him with those remarkable amber eyes. "I cannot carry you up the ravine wall. I will need to find another path." "I'm not exactly light," Tobias agreed. He was tall himself, over 6 feet, and solid with muscle from his years as a soldier and his recent months of hard labor. Kresh's lips quirked slightly. "I am stronger than I look." She proved it by lifting him with apparent ease once she'd found a gentler slope out of the ravine. Tobias tried not to focus on how it felt to be held against her, on the warmth of her body through their layers of clothing, on the way her scent pine and leather and something uniquely her surrounded him. This was a rescue, nothing more. She was simply being kind to someone who'd been kind to her in return. but his heart didn't seem to understand that logic, beating faster every time she adjusted her grip. The journey back to his cabin took over an hour. Kresh moved carefully, mindful of his injury, but even so the jostling sent waves of pain through him. By the time she shouldered open his door and carried him inside, Tobias was gray-faced and sweating despite the cold. She laid him on his bed the first time she'd been inside his home, the first time they'd been closer than shouting distance, and he was too racked with pain to properly appreciate it. Kresh moved around his cabin with purpose, building up the fire, heating water, finding his limited medical supplies. She made a tea from the herbs she'd gifted him weeks before and helped him drink it. Bitter, but within minutes the pain had dulled to a manageable throb. "You should sleep," she said, pulling the blanket over him. "The herbs will help. Will you be here when I wake?" The question came out before he could stop it, vulnerable and pleading. Kresh hesitated, her hand still on the blanket. "I should not. But will you?" A long pause. Then, so quietly he almost missed it. "Yes." Tobias let his eyes close, let the herbs pull him down into darkness. His last conscious thought was that her hand had found his and squeezed gently before letting go. When he woke, evening had fallen and the cabin was warm with firelight. Kresh sat in his chair by the hearth, her long legs stretched out before her, a piece of wood in her hands. She was carving something, her movements sure and steady. She'd removed her outer furs, and in the firelight her green skin seemed to glow. "You stayed," Tobias said, his voice rough from sleep. She looked up, and for the first time he saw her smile. It transformed her face, brightening those amber eyes. "I gave my word. You could have left once you knew I was sleeping soundly. I could have." She returned her attention to her carving. "But you asked me to stay, and after weeks of hiding, of watching from the shadows, I found I did not want to return to that." Tobias pushed himself up carefully, propping his back against the wall. His leg throbbed, but the pain was bearable. "Why did you hide? I would have welcomed you from the start." "Would you?" Kresh's tone was mild, but he heard the skepticism beneath it. "A human war veteran and an orc, you fought my people, perhaps killed them." "And you may have killed mine," Tobias countered. "The war made monsters of us all. But the war is over. We're just two people trying to survive out here. It is not over for everyone." She set down her carving, giving him her full attention. "There are humans who would kill me on sight, who would see an orc near human settlements and assume I was raiding, hunting, preparing for violence. I have been shot at twice since I came to these lands. Once by a farmer who saw me checking his fields for game, once by a traveler on the road." Tobias felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Were you hurt, grazed?" "Nothing serious, but I learned to be more careful, to stay hidden." She gestured around the cabin. "When I found you, I thought I would simply leave game and move on, but you were so ill, so weak. I found myself returning to check on you, to make sure you survived. And then you began leaving gifts in return and messages, and I—" "You what?" Kresh looked away, but not before he saw vulnerability flash across her face. "I was lonely, more than I had admitted to myself. Reading your words, learning about you, it was like having a friend again. I convinced myself that was enough, that the distance was safer for both of us. And now I am in your home, tending your fire, and the distance seems like foolishness." She met his eyes again. "But I still do not know if this is wise." "Probably not," Tobias admitted. "But very little in my life has been wise. Coming out here alone, for instance. Nearly starving because I was too proud to admit I was failing. Falling into a ravine like a complete fool." That surprised a laugh from her, a deep, genuine sound that made something in Tobias's chest unfurl like a flower seeking sun. "You make a strong case for foolishness. Stay," he said. "Not just tonight. Stay until I can walk again. I have the food you brought and we can share it. You said yourself that your shelter is destroyed. The winter is hard. Let us face it together rather than alone. Kresh was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. Until you can walk again, then we will see. It was a start. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural. Kresh slept by the fire, wrapped in her furs while Tobias took the bed. She was up before dawn, tending the fire and preparing food. They ate together, sharing the small table, and Tobias found her company easy in a way he hadn't expected. She spoke little at first, but as the days passed she opened up more. She told him about her clan, the forest stronghold where she'd grown up. About her mother, a respected hunter who'd taught her everything about tracking and wilderness survival. About her father, a craftsman who worked in leather and wood, whose skilled hands had shaped the bow she carried. About her 3 younger siblings, particularly her sister Mara, who'd cried for days when Kresh left. I sent word that I was safe, Kresh said one morning, staring into her tea, through a neutral trader, but I do not know if it reached her, or if she would care after what I did. She's your sister, Tobias said. Of course she cares. My leaving brought shame on the family. The male I rejected was from a powerful bloodline. His family has influence in the clan. My refusal was seen as an insult. Kresh's hands tightened on her cup. My mother tried to defend my choice, but she was overruled. The clan elders gave me a choice: accept the bonding or leave, so I left. That took strength, or stubbornness. I am not certain there is a difference. Tobias found himself telling her about his own family in return. About his father, a blacksmith who'd wanted Tobias to take over the forge. About the disappointment when Tobias had enlisted instead, drawn by promises of glory and adventure. About returning from the war to find his parents had died during a plague outbreak, the forge sold to pay their debts. I had nothing to return to, he said. No home, no family, no trade beyond killing. The land grant seemed like a gift from the gods, a chance to build something new. He laughed bitterly. I have not been very successful. You are alive, Kresh pointed out. You built a home with your own hands. You survived fever and starvation and a broken leg. These are not small things. Only because you helped. We helped each other. Your messages were. She paused, seeming to search for words. They reminded me that kindness exists, that not all humans see orcs as monsters. That was a gift I needed more than I knew. Their eyes met across the table, and Tobias felt that strange flutter in his chest again. Kresh looked away first, rising to tend the fire though it didn't need tending. As his leg healed, Tobias grew stronger. Kresh helped him exercise carefully, supporting his weight as he practiced putting pressure on the injured limb. She was patient, encouraging, never letting him push too hard too fast. Her hands on him were gentle but sure, and Tobias found himself hyper-aware of every touch, every moment of contact. He wasn't falling for her. He couldn't be. They were too different from 2 different worlds. The war had taught him that there were good people on both sides, but it had also taught him that the world wasn't ready for those worlds to mix. An orc and a human, together it was impossible. But his heart didn't care about impossibility. 3 weeks after the ravine incident, Tobias took his first steps without aid. His leg trembled but held. Kresh watched from across the room, her expression carefully neutral, and Tobias knew what this meant. He could walk. Their agreement had been until he could walk again. Well, he said, trying to keep his voice light, I suppose I'm recovered. It seems so. Kresh's tone matched his carefully casual, hiding whatever she really felt. You did well. Thanks to you. An awkward silence stretched between them. Tobias wanted to ask her to stay. The words crowded his throat, demanding to be spoken. But what right did he have? She'd stayed out of obligation, repaying his earlier kindness. Now that debt was settled. She had no reason to remain, and he had no claim on her. "I should gather my things," Kresh said finally. "The weather has been clear, good for travel." "Where will you go?" she shrugged. "North, perhaps. I have heard there are mountains where few humans venture. I could make a life there." "Alone. I have become accustomed to it." Tobias wanted to scream that she didn't have to be alone, that she could stay here, that they could build something together. But the words wouldn't come. Fear held them trapped, fear of rejection, of hope, of wanting something he couldn't have. Kresh moved around the cabin, collecting the few possessions she'd accumulated during her stay. It didn't take long. She'd always traveled light. When she finished, she stood by the door, her pack over her shoulder, her bow in hand. She looked at him for a long moment, and Tobias thought he saw the same conflict in her eyes that raged in his own heart. "Thank you," she said, "for your kindness, for the messages, for offering me shelter when I had none. Thank you for saving my life multiple times." Another silence. Kresh's hand moved to the door handle. "Wait," Tobias said, the word bursting out before he could stop it. "Just wait, please." She froze, her back to him. "Tobias, I don't want you to go." The words came in a rush now, tumbling over each other. "I know I have no right to ask you to stay. I know this is your decision. But these past weeks, they've been the best I've had since I came to this place. Maybe the best I've had in years. And I don't think it's just because I was injured and you were helping. I think it's because I like you. I like talking to you. I like sharing meals with you. I like hearing you laugh. And I realize this is impossible and foolish and all the things we both know it is, but Tobias." Kresh turned to face him, and there were tears tracking down her green cheeks. "I cannot." The words hit him like a physical blow. "I understand." "No, you do not." She set down her pack, moving toward him. "I want to stay. Every part of me wants to stay, but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of this. Of wanting something I cannot have. Of letting myself care for you and then losing you." She stopped a few feet away, her hands clenched at her sides. "I was bonded once before. Young, before the arranged marriage. He was killed in a raid on our territory, human soldiers. I thought I would die from the grief. When I finally healed enough to breathe again, I swore I would never feel that way again. Never let anyone close enough to hurt me like that." Tobias's chest tightened. "I didn't know. How could you? I did not speak of it." Kresh wiped at her tears roughly. "And then I found you, starving and alone, and I told myself I was simply helping someone in need. But your messages, they reached something in me I thought was dead. And these weeks together have been precious beyond measure. I care for you, Tobias Irving, far more than is wise. And that terrifies me." He closed the distance between them, moving slowly despite his healing leg. "I'm terrified too. I've spent years trying not to feel anything, trying to bury everything the war left behind. You make me feel again. You make me hope. And yes, that's terrifying. But the alternative, letting you walk out that door and spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been, that's worse." "What if they find out?" Kresh whispered. "What if humans come and see an orc living with one of their own? What if my clan discovers I have taken up with a human? We could both be killed. Then we'll be careful, we'll be smart about it." Tobias reached for her hand, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers curled around his, so much larger and stronger, yet trembling slightly. "I won't lie and say this will be easy. But nothing worth having ever is. Stay, please, let us try." "I am afraid," she repeated. "So am I, but I'm more afraid of being alone again. Aren't you?" Kresh's amber eyes searched his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes." "Then stay. For how long? As long as you want. A season. A year. Forever. Whatever you're willing to give." She moved then, closing the last bit of distance between them, and pulled him into an embrace that lifted him slightly off his feet. Tobias wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid strength of her body, the way she trembled against him. When she set him down, her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling. "I will stay," she said, "for as long as you will have me." Tobias cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the warmth of her skin. "That might be a very long time." "Good," she said, and kissed him. Her lips were soft despite the tusks that bracketed them, her kiss tentative at first, then growing bolder. Tobias sank into her, feeling something in his chest crack open and flood with warmth. This was want and fear and hope all tangled together. This was dangerous and perfect and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kresh laughed, that deep, genuine sound he'd heard only a handful of times. "Well," she said, "I suppose I should unpack." The seasons turned as all seasons do, and Tobias and Kresh built a life together in the shadow of the forest. They were careful at first, cautious about being seen together. When Tobias had to make the journey to the trading post for supplies, Kresh stayed hidden. When hunters passed through the area, she melted into the trees like smoke. It chafed at both of them, this hiding, but the alternative seemed too dangerous. Spring came with a rush of melt water and budding trees. Kresh helped Tobias plant his field, her strength making light work of turning the hard earth. She taught him better hunting techniques, showing him how to read tracks and sign he'd been missing. Under her tutelage, he became a competent woodsman, able to provide for himself for them both with increasing success. She was teaching him her language too, the Orc tongue with its guttural consonants and flowing vowels. He was a poor student, his mouth struggling to form sounds it had never made before, but she was patient. In return, he taught her to read and write more fluently. She took to it with surprising enthusiasm, spending evenings by the firelight laboriously copying passages from his few books. "Knowledge is power," she explained one night, her tongue caught between her tusks in concentration as she wrote. "My people value strength and courage, but they forget that the mind is the greatest weapon." "Is that why you refused the arranged bonding?" Tobias asked. "Because the warrior didn't value your mind, partially. He also beat his first mate and treated her like property." "I saw my future in her bruises and refused it." Kresh set down her quill. "My mother supported me, but she was one voice against many. Tradition is strong among my people." "It's strong among mine too," Tobias said. "Strong enough that most humans would call me a traitor for loving you." It was the first time either of them had used that word love. It hung in the air between them, fragile and powerful. Kresh's eyes widened slightly. "Is that what this is?" she asked softly. "Yes," Tobias said, his heart pounding. "At least for me. I love you, Kresh. I think I have since you first left that deer on my doorstep, though I didn't know it then." She rose from her chair and crossed to where he sat, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I love you too. I tried not to. I told myself it was gratitude or convenience or simple loneliness, but it is love. Deep and true and frightening in its intensity." They kissed then, and the kiss led to more. That night they came together fully for the first time, learning the geography of each other's bodies, finding that desire transcended all the differences of flesh. Kresh was gentle despite her strength, and Tobias was reverent, treating her body like the precious gift it was. When they lay tangled together afterward, sweat slicked and content, Tobias felt a peace he'd thought lost to him forever. "I want to spend my life with you," he murmured against her shoulder. "We have time to decide such things," Kresh replied, but her arms tightened around him. "Let us not rush toward the future. The present is sweet enough." But the present, as it turned out, had other plans. The trouble came in early summer, when the crops were high and green. Tobias had ventured to the trading post for salt and other necessities. He'd been gone 3 days, planning to make the journey there and back with a night of rest between. Kresh had stayed behind to tend the property and the growing plants. When Tobias returned, late in the evening of the 3rd day, he knew immediately something was wrong. The cabin door stood open. The garden had been trampled. And there were tracks everywhere, boot prints, many of them, along with the deeper prints of horses. "Kresh!" he shouted, dropping his packs and running toward the cabin despite his still tender leg. "Kresh!" No answer. Inside, the cabin had been ransacked, furniture overturned, supplies scattered. Signs of a struggle, and on the floor a smear of green blood. Tobias's world contracted to that single sight. Green blood, Kresh's blood. She'd been hurt, taken. He staggered, catching himself on the doorframe, his mind racing. Who, why, how had they known? A sound from outside, footsteps. Tobias spun, his knife appearing in his hand as if by magic, to find old Miriam Clark standing in the doorway. The widow's face was drawn with worry. "Tobias, thank the gods you've returned," she said. "I came as soon as I heard the commotion, but I was too late. What happened? Where is she?" Men came, 5 of them, rough types. I saw them from a distance, heading this way with purpose. By the time I got close enough to see what was happening, they had her. Miriam's lined face was pale. They knew Tobias. They knew there was an orc here. Someone must have seen her and reported it. "Which way did they go?" "South, toward Hallbrook. There's a garrison there. I heard them talking about the bounty." Miriam gripped his arm. "Tobias, you can't go after her. There are too many. They'll kill you, or worse, they'll realize you were harboring her willingly and hang you for it." "I don't care." Tobias pulled away, already moving toward the door. "I'm not leaving her to whatever they have planned." "Then take this." Miriam pressed a small purse into his hands. "It's not much, but it might help. And Tobias, be smart about this. You can't fight them directly. You'll need to be clever." He wanted to argue that he didn't need money, didn't need caution, only needed to get Kresh back. But Miriam was right. Charging in blindly would get them both killed. He forced himself to think like the soldier he'd been, assess the situation, identify the objective, plan the approach. "Thank you," he said, tucking the purse into his belt, "for warning me, for helping." "That girl saved your life," Miriam said simply. "And she's been nothing but kind in the few glimpses I've caught of her. I won't see her murdered by small-minded fools if there's anything I can do to prevent it." Tobias gathered supplies quickly, weapons, food, water, everything he might need. His leg would slow him down, but adrenaline would carry him far. He set out immediately, following the tracks south through the gathering darkness. The journey to Hallbrook normally took a full day on foot. Tobias made it in half that, driving himself mercilessly, ignoring the pain in his leg and the exhaustion dragging at his limbs. He arrived at dawn, a small frontier town built around the garrison that protected this stretch of the border. The garrison itself was a wooden fort, walls 12 feet high with guard towers at each corner. Inside would be barracks, an armory, holding cells. That's where they'd have taken Kresh, to the cells, to await whatever passed for justice out here. Tobias circled the fort carefully, staying out of sight, assessing the defenses. 2 guards at the main gate, 1 in each tower, though the ones on the north and east sides appeared to be sleeping or at least inattentive. The walls were solid but not impossible to scale, especially in the dark. But he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, or at the very least, information. He made his way into the town proper, finding a tavern that looked seedier than most. The kind of place where questions weren't asked and memories were short if the coin was right. He used some of Miriam's money to buy information from a talkative drunk. Yes, they'd brought in an orc yesterday. Female. Put up quite a fight, but they'd subdued her eventually. She was in the holding cells now, awaiting the commander's decision on what to do with her. Some wanted to execute her immediately. Others wanted to send her to the capital for interrogation, see if she'd reveal information about orc movements in the area. "When will they decide?" Tobias asked, keeping his voice casual. "Commander's due back tomorrow. He'll make the call." The drunk leaned in conspiratorially. "Between you and me, my money's on execution. Quicker and sends a message. Can't have orcs thinking they can wander human lands freely." Tobias's hands clenched beneath the table. Tomorrow, he had until tomorrow to get Kresh out. He spent the day planning and gathering what he needed: rope, a hooded cloak to hide his features, a small saw to cut through the wooden bars of the cell window. When night fell, he made his move. The north wall was indeed the weakest point. The guard in that tower had fallen asleep, his soft snores carrying on the night air. Tobias scaled the wall using the rope, his injured leg screaming in protest but holding. He dropped down inside, pressing himself against the shadows. The holding cells were a separate building near the center of the compound, 3 of them small and dark. Tobias crept closer, his heart pounding so hard he was certain someone would hear it. Through the barred window of the middle cell, he caught a glimpse of green skin. "Kresh," he whispered. "Kresh, it's me." A shape moved in the darkness. Then her face appeared at the window, bruised and cut but alive. Her eyes widened. "Tobias, what are you doing here?" Her voice was barely audible. "You should not have come. Did you really think I wouldn't?" He was already working at the bars with his saw, the metal cutting into the wood with soft, rasping sounds. "I'm getting you out. The guards will hear. Let me worry about that. Can you move? Are you badly hurt? Bruises and cuts. Nothing broken." "But Tobias, there are 20 soldiers in this garrison. You cannot fight them all." "I'm not planning to fight. I'm planning to run, very fast and very far." The first bar came free. He started on the second. "When I was in the army, I got very good at strategic retreats." Despite everything, Kresh made a sound that might have been a laugh. "You are insane." "Probably, but I love you, and insanity seems appropriate under the circumstances." The second bar came free. The window was barely large enough for her to fit through, but she was flexible and determined. Tobias helped pull her through, catching her as she dropped to the ground beside him. For a moment they just held each other, and he felt her trembling against him. "I thought I would die here," she whispered. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Can you climb?" "I can do whatever I must." They made it back to the north wall without incident. The rope was still in place, and Tobias sent Kresh up first. Her strength made the climb look easy despite her injuries. He followed, his leg burning with every movement, and they dropped down the outside just as someone inside raised an alarm. "The orc is gone. Escape." Someone sounded. They ran through the dark streets of the town into the forest beyond. Behind them, bells began to ring and voices shouted. Torches flared to life. But Tobias and Kresh had the advantage of darkness and determination. Kresh led them deeper into the forest, moving with the confidence of someone who knew wilderness like her own skin. They ran until Tobias's leg gave out, forcing him to stop or collapse. Kresh caught him, supporting his weight. "We need to keep moving," she said. "They will track us at first light." "I know. Just give me a moment." She handed him water from a canteen she must have taken from the garrison. He drank gratefully, then forced himself upright. They moved on, slower now but still putting distance between themselves and pursuit. Dawn found them miles from Holbrook, deep in territory Tobias didn't recognize. Kresh found a stream and they followed it for a time, hiding their trail. When she was satisfied they'd done enough, she led them to a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. "We can rest here," she said. "The water will hide our scent, and the cave is deep enough to keep us hidden." Tobias collapsed just inside the entrance, his leg throbbing, exhaustion crashing over him. Kresh knelt beside him, her hands gentle as she examined the leg. "You pushed too hard," she said. "You may have damaged the healing." "Worth it," he managed. "You're safe. Because of you, you came for me, you risked everything." "Of course I did. I love you." Kresh was quiet for a moment, her hand still on his leg. "No one has ever done something like that for me. Come into danger, risk their life. Then they were fools. You're worth any risk." She looked up at him, her amber eyes bright with tears. "I was wrong. Earlier when I said we should not rush toward the future. I want that future, Tobias, I want it with you, however we can make it work." He pulled her close, kissing her despite the exhaustion and pain. "Then we'll make it work. Together." They stayed in the cave for 3 days, waiting for the pursuit to die down, letting Tobias's leg recover from the abuse he'd put it through. Kresh hunted and foraged, keeping them fed. At night they held each other, making plans in whispers. "We cannot return to your cabin," Kresh said. "They know about it now. They will watch it waiting for us. I know, we need to go somewhere new, somewhere remote enough that no one will find us. I know a place. Far to the north in the mountains. There are valleys there where my people hunted before the war pushed us east. No humans venture there. It would be hard living, but we could survive. Then that's where we'll go." Tobias traced the line of her jaw with his finger. "As long as I'm with you, I can survive anything." The journey north took them weeks. They moved carefully, avoiding towns and settlements, living off the land. Kresh was in her element, teaching Tobias more with every day. He learned to read the forest the way she did, to see the signs and tracks that told stories of everything that moved through the wilderness. They crossed the border into the mountain territories on a day when the sky was sharp and blue. The peaks rose before them, snow-capped and magnificent. The valleys between were green and lush, fed by glacial streams. It was beautiful in a way that made Tobias's chest ache. "There," Kresh said, pointing to a valley nestled between 2 peaks. "That is where we will build our home." The valley was everything she'd promised. A stream cut through its center, providing fresh water year-round. The forest grew thick and full of game, and there wasn't another soul for miles in any direction. They built a new cabin together, larger than the one Tobias had made alone. Kresh's knowledge of Orcish construction techniques, combined with his human building methods, created something stronger than either could have managed separately. By the time autumn painted the leaves gold and red, they had a home that would withstand the mountain winters. They created a life that was part orc, part human, and entirely their own. Kresh taught Tobias the crafts her father had taught her, and soon he was working leather and wood with skill. He taught her to read from his books, and she devoured the knowledge hungrily. In the evenings they would sit by the fire, her reading aloud while he worked on whatever project occupied his hands, and the peace of those moments was profound. The first winter was hard but survivable. They had stockpiled enough food and fuel to see them through the worst of the cold. Snowdrifts piled high around their cabin, but inside was warm and safe. They spent those long, dark months learning every inch of each other, physically and emotionally. There were no more secrets between them, no more walls. Spring came again, and with it, an unexpected visitor. Tobias was outside working in the garden plot they'd prepared when he heard Kresh call out in her own language. He looked up to see her running toward the forest edge where a figure had emerged from the trees. Another orc, younger and smaller, with the same shade of green skin. "Mara." Kresh's voice was choked with emotion as she swept the younger orc into her arms. "Little sister, how did you find me?" The two of them spoke rapidly in Orcish, too fast for Tobias to follow. Finally Kresh turned, leading her sister toward where Tobias stood, and he could see both women had been crying. Tobias, this is Mara, my sister. Mara, this is Tobias Irving, the human I told you about in my letters. Letters? Tobias looked between them, confused. Mara grinned, showing small tusks. Kresh has been sending messages through the neutral traders, telling me of her life, of this place you built together. I had to see for myself if it was true, if a human and an orc could truly build something lasting. You came all this way alone? Kresh asked, concern shading her voice. Not quite alone. Mara gestured toward the forest. I have 3 friends traveling with me, all young orcs who have been cast out or who left by choice. When they heard about what you had done, about the life you are building here, they wanted to see if there might be room for them as well. Over the next few days, Tobias and Kresh met the others. There was Grok, a massive male who'd been cast out for refusing to participate in raids on human settlements. There was Shira, a quiet female who'd left after her entire family was killed in the war. And there was young Tark, barely more than a boy, who'd run away from a clan that wanted to train him as a warrior when all he wanted was to be a healer. They were all outcasts in their own way, searching for a place to belong. And looking at them, seeing the hope and fear mingled in their faces, Tobias understood what he and Kresh had created here. Not just a home for themselves, but the possibility of something larger. A place where orcs and humans could exist together peacefully, building something new from the ashes of old hatreds. We have room, he said, looking at Kresh for confirmation. She nodded, her eyes bright. It will be hard work. We'll need more cabins, larger gardens. But if you're willing to work, you're welcome here. The relief on their faces was answer enough. That spring and summer were filled with work unlike anything Tobias had experienced. With 7 sets of hands instead of 2, they expanded their little settlement rapidly. More cabins rose in the valley. The garden grew to 3 times its original size. They built a smokehouse and a root cellar. They established hunting territories and gathering grounds. Word spread among the orc clans, carried by traders and wanderers, of the valley where outcasts could find sanctuary. More came a steady trickle of those who didn't fit the mold their clans demanded. And to Tobias's surprise, humans began to arrive as well. Former soldiers like himself, people fleeing from pasts that haunted them, those seeking a new start in a place that didn't judge. Within 2 years, they had a small village. 23 orcs and 11 humans, living and working together. There were tensions at times, old prejudices died hard and misunderstandings were frequent. But Tobias and Kresh stood at the center of it all, proof that different worlds could meet and merge and create something beautiful. They formalized their bond in the 3rd year, in a ceremony that blended orcish and human traditions. Mara wove flowers into Kresh's hair while Miriam Clark, who'd made the long journey north to be present, helped Tobias with his ceremonial garb. They spoke their vows in front of the entire village, promising to stand together against whatever came. I never thought I would have this, Kresh said that night as they lay together in their cabin, the sounds of the celebration still echoing outside. A home, a family, a future. Neither did I, Tobias admitted. I thought I was broken beyond repair, but you put me back together. We put each other back together. She turned to face him, her hand resting over his heart. And we built something that matters. Look at what has grown from that first deer I left at your door. You saved my life that day. And you saved mine, many times over. She kissed him softly. I love you, husband. I love you, wife. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were harsh winters that tested their resolve. There were sicknesses that claimed lives despite Tark's growing skill as a healer. There were moments when old hatreds flared and threatened to tear their community apart. But through it all, Tobias and Kresh stood firm. They mediated disputes. They enforced the laws they'd created together, simple rules about respect and contribution, and the fundamental right of all people, orc or human, to live in peace. They led by example, showing that love could cross any divide. On their 5th anniversary, Kresh gave birth to their daughter. She came into the world screaming, her skin a shade of green lighter than her mother's, her eyes the same warm brown as her father's. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented, hope for a future where human and orc children could grow up knowing nothing of the old hatreds. More children followed over the years, both their own and others born in the village. They grew up speaking both languages, learning both traditions, seeing no contradiction in their blended heritage. They played together without regard for the color of their skin or the shape of their ears. 10 years after that first deer appeared on Tobias's doorstep, he stood on a hill overlooking the valley and marveled at what they'd built. The village had grown to nearly 100 souls. There were farms and workshops, a school where Kresh taught reading and writing to any who wanted to learn, a gathering hall where they celebrated festivals from both cultures, a healer's house where Tark trained apprentices in the medical arts. It wasn't perfect. Perfection was impossible. But it was good. It was home. It was proof that the world could change, one small community at a time. Kresh found him there, as she often did when he came to this spot to think. She slipped her hand into his and they stood in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the valley below. "You ever regret it?" she asked. "Giving up the chance at a normal human life?" Tobias turned to her, cupping her face in his hand. "Not for a single moment. This is the life I was meant to have. You are the person I was meant to find. Everything else was just the journey that brought me here. Even the hunger, the broken leg, the desperate rescue from a garrison. Especially those. Without them, I might never have realized how much I needed you, how much I needed this." He gestured to the valley. "All of it." Kresh leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. They'd both been broken once, both outcasts searching for a place to belong. And in finding each other, they'd found not just love but purpose. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the valley below, someone started a fire in the gathering hall. Soon there would be food and music and laughter. Their family, biological and chosen, would come together to share another evening. "Come on," Kresh said, taking his hand. "Let us go home." Home. Such a simple word, but it held everything that mattered. Tobias let her lead him down the hill, toward the light and warmth and love waiting in the valley. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. But in the valley, they'd claimed, everything had changed. 2 worlds had met and merged and created something entirely new. And it had all started with a single act of kindness, an orc huntress leaving a deer for a starving human. From that small seed, an entire future had grown. Tobias squeezed Kresh's hand, feeling her squeeze back, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. They reached the gathering hall as the music started, a blend of orcish drums and human strings creating a sound that belonged to neither culture, and both. Hope ran to greet them, her small hand reaching for Tobias while her other hand found Kresh's. Together, the 3 of them entered the hall, welcomed by the smiles and greetings of their community. That night, as the celebration wound down and families drifted back to their homes, Tobias and Kresh walked through the quiet village. The cabins were dark now, their occupants sleeping peacefully. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of the people below. But those small dramas mattered. Every choice to choose kindness over hatred, love over fear, connection over isolation, they all mattered. They accumulated, one after another, building something greater than the sum of their parts. Tobias had been a soldier once, trained to see orcs as enemies. Kresh had been an outcast, believing she would spend her life alone. But fate, or chance, or the simple human need for connection, had brought them together. And in coming together, they'd proven that the old divisions didn't have to define the future. They reached their cabin, and Tobias held the door for Kresh. She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with those amber eyes he'd learned to read so well. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For being brave enough to let me in. For seeing past what I was supposed to be and seeing who I actually am. For building this with me." Tobias pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I should be thanking you. You saved my life in every way that matters. Then we are even." "No," Tobias said, smiling. "We're better than even, we're partners. In everything." They went inside together, closing the door on the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments to choose hope over despair. But tonight was for rest and peace and the quiet comfort of being home. In the bed they'd built together, surrounded by the life they'd created, Tobias and Kresh held each other close. Outside, the wind whispered through the mountains. Inside, two hearts beat in rhythm, no longer alone, no longer afraid. The story that had begun with hunger and desperation had transformed into something beautiful. A story of love crossing impossible divides, of outcasts building sanctuary, of two broken people healing each other and, in doing so, helping to heal a fractured world. As sleep claimed them, Tobias's last conscious thought was of gratitude. For the deer that had appeared on his doorstep all those years ago. For the huntress who'd left it there. For every moment of difficulty and joy that had followed. All of it had been necessary. All of it had been worth it, because in the end, love had won. Not easily, not without cost, but completely. And that was enough. That was everything.